Hello and welcome back. I'm Kevin Cranny, and this is the second episode of my AP United States History review session. So today we're going to take a look at Unit 2, Building a Nation. If you remember, last time we left off at the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the escalation of the American Revolution. So let's take a look at the rest of the war. So when violence broke out, the colonists had to choose a side, whether they wanted to support the Americans as patriots or remain loyal to the British and be loyalists. So who were the patriots? They tended to be farmers, free blacks as opposed to slaves, politicians from the colonies, new light religions. If you remember, I talked about the Great Awakening in the last video. New light religions tended to sympathize with the patriots and some of the Indians as well. Loyalists were usually merchants who traded with the British, usually. The British also promised freedom for a lot of the slaves, which was very attractive. It goes without saying that British officials were also loyalists. Old light religions and, again, Indians were divided. So let's take a look at some goals for the British and the Americans for the war. The British had a powerful army. They wanted traditional pitched battles in an open field. They wanted to capture cities and divide the colonies. Diplomatically, the Americans were weak, so the British wanted to keep other countries out of the war. Politically, they wanted to maintain their colonial governments, keep up mercantilism and all of those crazy taxes that they had before the Declaration of Independence. The Americans wanted all of the opposite. They wanted to make the Revolutionary War a war of attrition. They favored guerrilla warfare and small little ambushes instead of large battles. Of course, they couldn't avoid all of the large battles. The Battle of Saratoga was one of them, but the Americans were able to win. And from that win, they were able to get a French alliance that proved very crucial. Political goals for the Americans: they wanted to keep their state governments, and they wanted to move away from a British economy, begin production, and make their own currency. So, as we all know, the Americans won the Revolutionary War against all odds. They became really their own country, and you need a set of laws when you become your own country. So our first constitution was the Articles of Confederation. Articles of Confederation have a pretty bad reputation, but excuse me, they were effective in some ways. Let's take a look at foreign relations. We opened up trade with China, which I find fascinating. We also had many new markets in Europe, but there was no trade with the British colonies in the Caribbean. The British still had forts in Canada, and they would harass us by arming Indians. We racked up a lot of war debts from the fighting, and we had border disputes with Spain. Economically, like I said, it was effective because a lot of new trade opened up. The shipbuilding industry was on the rise. We began some of our own domestic manufacturing, but still, it was mostly a nightmare under the Articles of Confederation. States had way too much power. There was no uniform currency. Money changed with the state you were in. States had their own tariffs against other states. There was no central national government calling the shots. States were way too powerful. Western lands, though, the way we dealt with them was pretty effective under the Articles of Confederation. We had the Land Ordinance of 1785, the Northwest Ordinance, and just more expansion beyond the Appalachian Mountains, beyond the former proclamation line of 1763, if you remember that. But still, the bad economy, the bad foreign relations, we had to make a new constitution, and in 1787 we did just that. The major problem would be the lack of national government, and to fix that we made the whole separation of powers, checks and balances, federalism, the three branches of government, to fix all of that. State power was also limited because taxes, tariffs, and trade were now all the responsibility of the national government and Congress. Currency We finally agreed on one currency, the US dollar. Made things a whole lot easier. Representation in Congress, if you remember, Virginia wanted it to be based on population. New Jersey wanted it to be the same for every state. So Connecticut came on in, made the great compromise in the bicameral system. In the House of Representatives, it would be representation would be based on population, but in the Senate, every state would have 2 senators. Slavery was also a problem that the Constitutional Convention addressed. As far as representation, slaves would count as 3/5 of a person under the 3/5 Compromise, and it also banned the importation of slaves from Africa in 1808. So during this convention and afterwards, our first political parties were created, and those were the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Anti-Federalists would later be known as Democratic Republicans, but Federalists wanted a strong national government. They really supported the whole separation of powers, checks and balances, and federalism thing, because they prevented tyranny, but at the same time promoted a strong central government. They also believed in a loose construction of the Constitution, which basically means if it doesn't say you can't do something in the Constitution, then you can do something. Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, the Democratic Republicans, they wanted a weak national government. They really promoted individual and state rights, which prompted the Bill of Rights, which were the first 10 amendments to our Constitution. And they believed in a strict construction of the Constitution, which means if it doesn't say you can do it in the Constitution, then you can't do it at all. So some notable figures. This is Alexander Hamilton, the leader of the Federalist Party. This is John Adams. He'd become the second president. This is Thomas Jefferson, the leader of the Anti-Federalists, and James Madison right here. Actually was a Federalist, but would later change sides. But right now, let's focus on George Washington. Obviously our first president. He becomes president in 1788. He doesn't identify with either the Federalists or the Anti-Federalists. He tries to please them both. On the Federalist side, he agreed to form the National Bank. He began the collection of state debts, formed the excise tax on whiskey, and he stayed out of the French Revolution, which the Anti-Federalists wanted to get involved in. Excuse me. To support the Anti-Federalists, he put the capital in Washington, D.C., which was in the South, and the Anti-Federalists were mostly located in the South. And he also banned protective tariffs, which helped Northern Federalist businesses. John Jay was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and his treaty temporarily ended hostilities with Britain. Keyword there is temporarily, and he ended those hostilities in 1794. There was land expansion through both diplomacy and violence with the Indians. Pinckney's Treaty, something to know, with Spain in 1795, gave us all of this land highlighted in dark blue. And then Washington's farewell on his way out. He warned against political parties and foreign alliances, both of which we broke. We didn't really listen to George Washington. Take it how you will. John Adams becomes our second president, as I mentioned earlier, in 1796. Not the best reputation. There's the infamous XYZ affair and the undeclared quasi-war with France, which was mostly fought on sea. France was angry at us because we weren't really trading with them. We didn't really help them out with their revolution. Kind of a big deal. But John Adams creates a full-time American Army and Navy. He also passes the awful Alien and Sedition Acts, makes it illegal to speak out against the government, makes it legal to deport people, and this just creates more rivalry between the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists. Here's a picture right here of an actual physical fight in Congress between politicians. So that's not very good. After one term, John Adams is not reelected. Thomas Jefferson takes over in 1800 in the first realigning election in our history. He's a Democratic Republican. Consistent with his party, he pardons a lot of the victims of the Alien and Sedition Acts. He cleanses the bureaucracy of Federalists. This results in the Marbury versus Madison case. Very important court case. You don't have to know the details, but you do have to know that judicial review became a thing because of it. And that basically says the Supreme Court can identify laws as unconstitutional and refuse to enforce them. Continuing on with Jefferson's consistencies with the Democratic Republicans, he repealed the excise tax on whiskey. He made land more affordable to small farmers, and he reduced the size of the military. Inconsistent with his party, he kept the National Bank. He bought the Louisiana Territory from Napoleon, who needed the money to fund his wars in Europe. That was the whole Lewis and Clark expedition. Following that, more settlement in the West. He fought the Barbary pirates off the coast of northern Africa, but he did not support the Democratic Haitian Revolution. Just wrapping up Jefferson's administration, there was mounting tensions and harassment from both France and Britain. They just thought we were a small country and we could still get pushed around. Jefferson passed the ineffective and unpopular Embargo Act in 1807. It really hurt a lot of American merchants. And then James Madison was elected in 1808. He was also a Democratic Republican. But his first term, there he is right there, his first term was riddled with events that led to the War of 1812. The British and French continued to violate American shipping rights. The British refused to leave their forts in North America. They actually armed Indians like Tecumseh, who just wreaked havoc in the West. There was the British impressment of U.S. sailors, so British would capture U.S. ships, and if the sailors were of British origin, the British would make them work for them. And on top of all of that, the United States was not economically or militarily prepared for war, but the Democratic Republicans wanted a war, and the war came. War of 1812 against the British. It was on three fronts, mostly. Andrew Jackson, he'd become the seventh president of the United States. He led the Americans in the South. There was also heavy fighting in the North and in Canada. There was actually a naval battle on Lake Champlain, which is really cool, actually. There was fighting in the Chesapeake and Middle America. The British sacked Washington, D.C., burnt down the White House. James Madison was able to get away, but it was a big victory for them. Still, they lost at Baltimore. Heroic defense there. That's when Francis Scott Key wrote our national anthem. And even after the peace treaty, Andrew Jackson didn't hear the news yet, and he had a huge decisive victory at New Orleans. That's what this painting is right here. But that was after the peace treaty was signed. Still a great shot in the face to the British. So yes, the Treaty of Ghent made the peace, ended the War of 1812, but it didn't do much else. It just really restored the boundaries to where they were before the war. Prisoners were returned peacefully, but that's about all. Hartford Convention is important to know. The Federalists hated the War of 1812, did not support it at all. It was a mostly Democratic-Republican war, so they were all salty, and they had this Hartford Convention, and they wanted to make amendments limiting the power of the Democratic Republicans, and they did all this stuff, and it was treasonous, really. And it just completely shut down the Federalist Party. Democratic Republicans were on the rise. There was new economic independence in the United States, more increase in domestic manufacturing, and intense nationalism. You see this painting down here in the bottom right. We owe allegiance to no crown. Just soaring nationalism. America was on the rise. We proved ourselves once again. And we're going to see where that momentum takes the young country when we continue next time. So thank you for watching.